Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 25th. It's the 25th of November, 2019. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Mixing it up a little bit here, doing it on a Monday night instead of Sunday. Yesterday was kind of a crazy day for me, so we're getting caught up. And we're going to talk about a few things here. I want to talk about, first of all, as people are gathering here, a little bit about product design when it comes to audio gear. And product design in general. I put out a video on the Rode NTG5 yesterday, and I got a couple of comments that got me thinking a little bit. One person, and this is not to be critical, this was just something that got me thinking. One person said, well, Rode should give away, they should also, for the Rode NTG3 buyers, that's their longer shotgun microphone that's been in production for, I don't even know how long, maybe 10 years. And they should also give away with that a good shock mount, just like they do with the NTG5, which is a less expensive microphone. And so, and they kind of made some, I'm not sure the right way to put this. They basically suggested that it almost seemed like that Rode's ripping us off by not giving us a shock mount with the NTG3. So that may or may not be. I don't know. I don't have insight into their financials or their P&L or profit and loss for that particular product. I have no idea. But I am a product manager. I do understand the process of product design, product launches, product management. You know, once a product is out there, the R&D that goes in behind it, all of the work that goes into figuring out, okay, what can we sell this at and make money? And so that's the first thing, I guess, that I think a lot of people don't really realize when it comes to product design. It's just, from a consumer standpoint, it seems very simple. This company over here made this awesome product. Why can't everyone else make it? Well, it's not quite that simple. And, you know, this microphone over here, which sounds awesome, is a lot more expensive than this microphone over here, which sounds just as good. So there, I think, are a number of things at play there. And these are just going to be some of my thoughts here, and then we'll jump into the questions after this. But first of all, I think hearing is very personal. I think that different people have different preferences. It's perfectly fine for one person to prefer the sound of a Schoeps CMC 641. And which is a $1,600 or $1,700 microphone, very well revered in the film and TV world. I own one. I think it's a fine mic, but it can be perfectly fine for someone else to have a preference for a different mic that may not be as expensive. Maybe an Audio-Technica 4053B, which is more like a $700 mic. Is one better than the other? Feature-wise, one might have more than the other. You might have a preference for one more than the other. One might work in more situations better than the other. One might fit more voices that you tend to record more than the other, perhaps. But there's just a lot of subjectivity. So I think that's the first thing that's important for people to understand is when you're looking for a microphone, use your own ears, and you'll have to make that decision on your own. It's not like someone can tell you, anyone can tell you, including the best reviewers out there, which microphone is better than another. They can tell you what their preferences are and what their opinions are, but that doesn't necessarily mean it applies 100% to you. Now, there's some things that are a little bit more objective, like this microphone has these features and this microphone does not. But in terms of the sound, I think there's a little bit more subjectivity when you get to a certain point. I think the lower end mics, you can usually definitely tell a difference. You can usually tell that they don't sound quite as good, but it almost feels like once you get to about $500 US and up, that they're, to a large extent, not 100%, but to a large extent, it comes down to your personal preference for what it sounds like. And that's a gross generalization as well, so take that for what it's worth. But anyway, back to product management. So this comment about, well, if you buy an NTG3, Rode should also give you a shock mount there. Well, there are a couple things to consider here from my point of view. Number one, and again, this is not knowing all the internals of how Rode operates or anything. They haven't given me anything special there. But if there are a lot of factors that go into pricing a product, whether it's a microphone, audio recorder, whatever. And part of it is a cost basis. So whatever it costs to produce that product is going to very much influence its final price. For example, a lot of the Sennheiser microphones are expensive. So the MKH416 is a $1,000 microphone. My MKH 8050 is a $1,200 microphone. They also, by the way, they manufacture Neumann microphones. So the U87 is a what? I can't remember, 2,500 or something dollar microphone. And I've actually been to the Sennheiser factory in Vitamark, and I've seen kind of how that process works. So one factor is how many of these products do they make? Are they mass market products or are they niche products? If they're niche products, it's more expensive to manufacture each individual item. If they're not selling them in mass quantities, that's going to influence the price. It already kind of moves it more towards the boutique end of the spectrum versus the mass market end of the spectrum. And it's just more expensive that way. In the case of Sennheiser, a lot of that assembly is actually done by hand. There are some robotics for some of the electronics, but a lot of the actual assembly is done by hand. And so these are people that are fairly skilled. They're not just, they go through a lot of training. And they have, the manufacturing also, how tight are the manufacturing tolerances? That if you get tighter manufacturing tolerances, you're going to get more consistent products, but it's going to cost you more to get there. And so there are just so many of those kind of factors. How much research and development went into the product? So we have, daily, I get requests from, probably every day I get about 5 to 7 requests from a Chinese company who has a new $73 microphone that they want me to review. And if they're selling them for $73, of course, there's first the exchange rate that's working in their favor, but potentially. But there's also, there may not have been, and I guess in most of those cases, there hasn't been a lot of research and development put into those microphones. They certainly haven't paid 15 engineers 2 years worth of salary at US kind of, salary prices to do the research and development for that microphone. And so that's a factor as well. That goes into the pricing of the product as well. So, and then of course, every business, this comes as no surprise to anyone, every business is in business to make money. So they have to have some margin above their cost basis to sell the product. Of course, there's a ton of overhead costs that I haven't talked about. The rent for their buildings where they do all this work. They have product managers, they have accountants, they have, all the things that a business needs to run is also overhead. And so there's a cost basis for that as well. So sometimes I feel like people just kind of oversimplify the process of product design and development and release. And it is not as easy as it seems. And despite the fact that this year, for example, Rode has introduced the NTG5. Early this year, the Rode Wireless Go. Now the NTG5, and they've also now announced their video mic NTG. We have Sound Devices who announced their Scorpio, then their 833, then their 888, and their MixPre 2 series at the same, all within 1 year. And it just seems like, it's really easy for these companies to just crank this stuff out. But the reality is they've been working on that stuff for a good long time, for years. So sometimes we get in this bubble where we feel like, oh, companies should be able to crank this stuff out and know exactly what I want. Now, on the other hand, this is not to say that every company doesn't do certain things that are annoying to us as consumers or consumers of their products, at least. Canon is, I think, a fine example in the camera world where they have the technology that they could put into their less expensive cameras, but they apparently intentionally choose not to do that. And is that a cost issue? Perhaps partly, I don't know. But I suspect a lot of it's actually software. Maybe some of it's hardware as well. I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of things that it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, these Canon, sub $5,000 cameras are lame because they didn't have all these amazing features that they have in their higher end cameras. Well, in some cases, that may be a result of a company who is getting very large and has a variety of different product lines. And they're basically saying, you know what, we don't want to cannibalize our higher end line by putting all the features into the lower end line. It can be frustrating. I totally get it. And I'm not saying that other companies don't do that as well, but um, sometimes I think we get really frustrated as the users of these products and we assume a lot of things. So that I don't know why I wanted to share that. I just wanted to say that because I get a lot of comments about, well, the NTG5 doesn't sound as good as the NTG3. You know what? That's fine. If that's how if the NTG3 sounds better to your ear, that's fantastic. A number of people, Sennheiser MKH416 is far superior to any of the Rode NTG microphones. Comments like that as well. If that's how you feel about it, that is fantastic. By all means, save up and buy yourself a Sennheiser instead. So anyway, so those are some thoughts there. Don't get too hung up on these things. If it sounds good to your ear, get several data points, get several samples from several people, and make your decision based on what to you sounds best when it comes to buying microphones. Okay, let's jump into some questions. I apologize, I did not have time to put all of these into a presentation like I used to, so I'm going to read them to you. But I think we can still get what we need to do. Thomas Donalek asks, it might be the right mic. He was talking about the Audio-Technica 4053B. It might be the right mic for me, but US $600 price is on the high side. He's upgrading his Zoom H4n to the MixPre 3.2, which is probably a higher immediate priority to make the largest improvement in audio quality. Yeah, it seems reasonable. For indoor interview corporate situations with a mic on a boom overhead, what would you suggest for US $450 and under as far as microphones are concerned? Now that a hypercardioid capsule kit is available for the Octava MK012 in their movie set for about US $210, it seems like an interesting option. Okay, so let me say this. So I actually do have the MK012. It's a Russian-made microphone from Octava. I have the cardioid version, but I know, of course, they have a hypercardioid version as well. And yes, I think that would be a fine option. The thing about about the Octava MK012 is, in particular, is that, from my point of view, it does sound very good. And a lot of other people agree with that. It's been a very popular kind of indie film mic for a long time. The one thing that I have noticed about it is that it's extraordinarily sensitive to movement. So it transfers, it has handling noise-wise, it doesn't do super well. You have to have a very, very good shock mount. But if you just have it statically boomed for seated interviews and things of that nature, not a big deal. So yeah, I think that's a great option. Let me just show you, there are a couple other options here. Let me just see if I can switch over here. Here's an old video I did in 2016. But we looked at 5 boom microphones for dialogue, cardioid, supercardioid, and hypercardioid. I would actually recommend, this one's maybe a little out of your budget, the Audix SCX1HC. A lot of people like that one. And AKG also has this blue line. The picture doesn't do it justice. It looks like, they always show this bigger. This actually fits on top of this. It's the same diameter. But this is actually a pretty decent option as well. It's the AKG Blue Line Series Hypercardioid microphone kit, and that does fit within your budget. So that's another one worth considering. I would actually, I definitely am supportive of the idea of the Octava. I think it sounds fantastic, and it's a reasonable price. So now I have heard, I don't know this for sure, but I have heard that some of the Octavas are made in Russia, some are made in China. Don't know how true that is, and some have suggested that the Russian versions sound really good. The consistency from copy to copy on the Chinese-made versions were not as good. So don't know how true that is, just something I've heard, something to consider. So I would buy it from if you can, an Octava source. I actually bought mine from Thomann over in Germany. So that's something to consider. So thanks for the question, Thomas. I hope that was helpful. If anyone else has other suggestions for $450 hypercardioid microphones or less expensive, would love to hear those in the comments as well. So feel free to share those. All right, next question here. Next up from Mark Owens. I got a cable from B&H for the Tentacle Sync 3.5 millimeter to 1/4 inch for Blackmagic cinema camera. And you set the camera to mic level and also the tentacle sync up to my Zoom F6. You got the green flashing light confirmation that the tentacle was now in, jam sync to your F6, so that's good. When I change the cable to connect it to the Blackmagic, nothing is showing going into camera. It's not registering that sound is coming into camera. You tried both the 1/4 inch ports on the Blackmagic, no good. Tried recording a bit on Blackmagic while tentacle connected, but when played back, no timecode. The sound bars on Blackmagic do not move. Is there a setting I am not getting right? Mark. Mark, it sounds like it, and I don't know that camera well enough. I know what the Pocket Cinema cameras do, but not familiar with the original cinema camera from Blackmagic Design. So you may need to contact their technical support, but I assume that those inputs are microphone level inputs. So you're going to have to change your tentacle, first of all, to mic level. You'll do that in the app. And then you'll want to figure out how to turn on the microphone inputs on the camera. I assume you're just going to record it as audio timecode, and then in post, you'll convert it to metadata timecode. So definitely, I would contact their technical support if you need help getting that going. All right, next is a question from Mr. Alan Moore. I'm going to kind of jump ahead here, Alan. You're slightly overwhelmed by Lux, LUTs, and LUFs. Understandable. You're doing a color grading course at the same time that you're doing the audio courses, so that can be a lot to kind of absorb at the same time. Anyway, my voiceover question is that in playback, the sound quality and loudness vary greatly between your iMac with headphones, an older MacBook Pro or a MacBook, and an iPhone. How then to treat the audio in post? Well, first of all, each of those items have volume controls, so you're going to get some inconsistency in terms of the loudness. That's normal. And you can't control that in your video, how loud somebody plays something, but what you can control is your post-processing. And I think we need to show you a video that we did back in 2018, so a little over a year ago. Let's show my screen here. If you do a search for Curtis Judd audio normalization, make your video consistently loud. That will give you some input on what to do. You were asking some questions. It looks like you were getting some things muddled up here. So if I answer just set everything to -18 LUFS and you'll be all right, Alan, it is not the answer. Well, in the video, I say that you need to loudness normalize everything to a target level like -16 LUFS or -19 LUFS in post, and here's how you do it. So that's going to be the answer. I'm not going to go through that all here. We've gone through it a number of times on the Sound for Video sessions, but that video should get you what you need to do. So hopefully that helps for you there. All right, we had another question come in from Mike. And actually, let me grab something here. Mike says, I bought the Sound Devices optional battery sled to house 2 L-type battery packs for the Mix Pre. That's what this is here. I've got 2 small L-type batteries in there right now. I installed 1 battery pack in the sled, and now I can't get it out. Well, let me show you how you do that. There is on the back here a switch. And if I pull it down, then I can release the top battery by pushing it that direction. That's how you do it. And likewise for the other battery, pull it down to get the tab out of the way, and you can push it out. So that's how you get your battery out. Wow, there's a really practical lesson there. We don't often get to do something that straightforward, but that's how you get your batteries out. Next question, the Mix Pre 2 here isn't here yet. But am I supposed to charge both these through the Mix Pre's onboard USB charging? No, the Mix Pre does not have an onboard charger. You will have to get a separate charger for your batteries. So I'm glad you asked that now. So you're going to have to get online and order yourself a charger. There are lots of those options out there. So thanks for that question. All right. Let's take a look here. We got a lot of comments going on. Slav Guns, is this live or is it a replay? This is live. It's the real deal. Hello, Alejandro. It's good to hear from you today. Archie. Aloha, all. You're studying your Fourier transforms in sound harmonics, and you're amazed by the new Behringer Poly D, and here comes Mr. Sound Guy. Well, you're in the right spot, nerding out with your audio friends here. Pradeep, good morning. Alan is here. Very good. The Vedic Way, welcome. Also, by the way, thank you very much. You were one that helped me with my video yesterday on the Rode NTG5. We had a, what's the best way to put it? A hiccup? We had an issue with Final Cut Pro 10. I do my audio processing mainly in Audition and Isotope RX, and then I sync it to the video in Final Cut and do the edit in Final Cut. And Final Cut, it turns out I learned the hard way that it mangles, it doesn't do well with poly wave files. That is a wave file that has more than 2 tracks, and it gets really confused with those. And when you split them apart and you try to import them into Final Cut, it thinks that they're the same file, and so it will only import one of the tracks. It won't import all of the rest of them. And so as a result of all this and me trying to trick it so that I could import all of them and then sync all of them up to the same video clip, it was a microphone sample test where I recorded with 4 different microphones at the same time, and I wanted to be able to play back from each of the same clip from each of the different microphones kind of in sequence. And what happened is it basically mangled things, and the wrong microphones ended up attached at the wrong time, so on and so forth. So I'm still trying to figure out how to get that working, but what I ended up doing to fix that is I went over into DaVinci Resolve to do that part of the video edit, it rendered that out, brought it back into Final Cut, replaced that with all of the original rest of the video, re-rendered that, and had to re-upload. So for any of you that saw the video earlier, you may, if you're really interested in those mics, you may want to go back and re-listen to at least that portion where we have the different microphones. And more important than that, there's some suggestion that there may still be some problems with that. So if you are really interested, in the video description, I put a link to the WAV files, the audio. I better make sure those are still there. I wonder if I put it on the new video, but let me just take a look while we're on here. I put a link to a Google Drive where I have the original WAV files. So if you want to listen to the original microphone recordings, then you can go get them there. And that's so that YouTube doesn't mess with them and do additional compression from WAV format to AAC format where it's throwing out some information, so on and so forth. So thank you for helping out there. Kevin, you have a question. All right, I'll look for your question. Vedic Way, we just posted a question on the other video, but I guess I might as well ask here. Let's just go see if what we've got here. Do you know any other RF bias mics besides the Rode NTGs and the Sennheiser MKH? Not off the top of my head, I don't, but others might here. Those are the 2 companies that I think have done the most with them, and in particular, Sennheiser has used that design a lot. My understanding, a few things with that design, RF bias design versus DC bias design, is that generally it can be a little bit tricky, the design, but they can get a very low impedance output, and they tend to work. They tend to hold up a little bit better under humidity because water getting onto the diaphragm is not going to generally create quite as many problems. It can still create problems, of course, but it's not going to mess with the electronics so much as it's going to make the diaphragm heavier, is my understanding. So in any case, the 2 main manufacturers I know of that work on the RF bias design for their microphones are, and not all of them, obviously. In the Rode lineup, it's the Rode NTG5, NTG3, and the NTG8, I believe, which is their long shotgun. And then on the Sennheiser side, it's any of them that have the name MKH, are the RF bias microphones. So they have some that are not RF bias as well. All right, and evidently Alejandro has a bunch of questions too. All right, so welcome to everyone that's here with us tonight. I appreciate your joining. Alan's having some trouble connecting. Alan, I hope that you're able to get the discussion from a little earlier on there. Good to see you again, Vincent. Let's see here. Andre. I'm so sorry, people. I'm going to try and I generally am going to try to announce ahead of time when we do these streams. Things have been a little crazy lately. I'll be better at that. It's generally it will end up being Sunday night just because that's generally what works best for my schedule, but we'll probably have to mix it up a little bit. No company owes anyone anything. This is about making money at the end of the day to keep the business going for more products and so on. Yeah, that definitely on the product management front. Agreed. I'm still using the NTG1. I actually have two. That's NTG2 was actually my first mic, and I think for the price, it's not a horrible mic. It's a little bit older. There's some other, Deity has some options now that I think maybe work a little bit better, but still not a bad one. Back to products and companies. They can tell you what to buy, but not how to listen. How people expect others to do that job for them too. Sound guys who don't listen for themselves are not much of a sound guy if they don't listen. Agreed. You gotta listen. Ooh, this is a good question from Archie. Do Shep's microphones have a good return on investment? I'd like to hear what some other people have to say on that. Here's the interesting thing. Sorry for the wait there. So we've got the Shep's, whoa, can hardly see it. The CMC, the Colette with the MK41 capsule. This is a super cardioid. Used a ton in TV and film. About $1,700 US last time I checked. Good microphone. I like it. Shep's design philosophy is to make the microphone sound as natural as possible. By that, what I understand that to mean is as true to life as possible. They're not trying to hype anything, they're not trying to do any sort of bass boosting or anything of that nature. What I do find on this is that it is not necessarily the most flattering on everyone's voice. It tends to me sound a little bit harsh sometimes, but a lot of people love this microphone. Plenty of professional production mixers love using this microphone, and they do it all the time. What's the return on investment? I do use this microphone from time to time, and I like it, but I don't like it on some people's voices. So I never take this to a job thinking absolutely that this is the mic I'm going to use. I actually want to hear the actor's voice a little bit, and I may put this on the boom and kind of get a sense for how well it's going to work with that voice. But if it's sounding a little too harsh in the higher frequencies in particular, I will pull this off and go to another mic very quickly. So it's not my default, but it is a pretty good mic. Is that a good return on investment? I think what you can know for sure is that if you're going to be working on films with budgets large enough to have a post team, the post team will typically appreciate having tracks that are recorded with something like this. So yeah, I think the return on investment is there. If you're producing videos that are just going to a web, I'm not so sure it's quite as much value there, because I'm finding, that the uploading to the web, going to H.264 and AAC format, some of that, some of it's lost in that process. Let me just put it that way. So I don't regret purchasing this microphone, but I also don't love it so much that I refuse to use anything else and make this my automatic default for every job I do. I don't know if that helps, but I'm interested in other people's thoughts. Some people love the Shep's line. Absolutely love them. The CMIT 5U and the 2U, I think, are the two shotgun microphones. One of them has active noise canceling built in, and the other one is just a more traditional shotgun microphone. And then this one for the indoor booming is a very popular one. So I think I could say this. you probably won't be sorely disappointed if you were to spend that money and it would serve you for many years. One thing to keep in mind, though, I have heard complaints. These are DC bias microphones, as I understand it. So, again, if you're working in really high humidity situations, you'll have to be kind of careful. And in fact, the kit comes with this little thing here, which is interesting. The capsule's removable, and it actually comes with this little kit for storing the capsule in here. If you are going from a less humid to a much more humid environment, you store the capsule in here until you get it up to temperature, and then you put it on the microphone, because these have a tendency to get to be affected by humidity quite, in some cases, quite severely. And some people have been kind of expressed a lot of frustration with this mic over that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But again, other people say the sound is to die for. So doesn't sound great on my voice, I don't think. So there's a great question. Thank you, Archie. Regarding your sound design courses in particular, Fairlight, is having a new iMac more than enough to get started before investing in additional items? I think so, generally. And those are, yeah, it depends on the video is going to be the bigger thing, I think. Typically, the audio generally is not going to be too much of a problem unless you're doing 200 tracks or something like that and putting a ton of heavy processing on them. So, but yeah, I found that the Macs with 4 cores or more generally are able to do well on that, Alejandro. Same applies for Adobe Audition, as I'm still trying to decide. By the way, I got an iMac that I can't wait to use for this new adventure. That's congratulations. That should be, yeah, the iMacs, again, if it's 4 core or more, I think a lot of this, I don't know what you ended up getting, but a lot of them have plenty of power. I was working on a 5K iMac 4 core until, I don't know how long I've had the iMac Pro now. I don't remember. The iMac Pro does well too, obviously. It looks like Vincent has some background in product management as well. And yes, I agree on all those fronts. Potential for life stories of sound companies and their boffins, workers, manufacturing, etc. Local identity. Thanks for that. Canon is slowly getting better with Fujifilm and Sony, and others eat Canon's lunch, but cinema is their bread and butter, but the lower end is leaving money on the table. Yeah, that's a good point. The question that I have to say, though, is cinema is a pretty small market, really. Like, if you're talking about serious cinema cameras, $10,000 and up, that's a pretty small market. Like, those consumer-grade cameras are a much higher volume type of product. So, I don't know. It just seems to me like in today's world, they could lure a lot of, like popular YouTubers from their consumer grade cameras up into their cinema line if they were a little bit more compelling in their lower end. I don't know. I'm not in that market. Anyway, Hexspa, those mid-range Telefunkens look cool. I agree. And you have the he or she has. I'm not sure if it's a. Sorry, I don't know your name, but you have the Sennheiser MKE 600, which is pretty good. That is one of their non-RF bias microphones, and yeah, that one it's a very bright. Sennheiser tends to have a very bright sound to their microphones generally. All right. When I was talking about the Octava, the Chinese versus the Russians, I don't know if that's really true, but again, that's hearsay, so take it for what it's worth. Mr. Donalek, thanks for the question. All right, Kevin. All right, I was excited to use the new timecode generator in the MixPre 6.2, but every time I turn off the unit, the timecode wouldn't stay true, and I would have to rejam my tentacle sinks. Am I doing something wrong? No, I don't think so. The MixPre will not keep the timecode for more than a short period of time when it's powered down. And I have to confess, I have so many different recorders in my brain right now, I can't remember. But I think, generally, if you're gonna have it off for more than an hour or two, I think you're gonna need to rejam anyway. I don't know if that's what you mean, Kevin. And I haven't tested that extensively. Usually I just make it a habit, especially with the tentacle sinks. With the tentacle sinks ease, I just rejam after the main break in the day anyway, just for good measure. So um, I don't know how long you've been leaving them off, but I believe, yeah, there's going to come a time. Basically, I think what happens in most cases, on most of the recorders that have inbuilt timecode generators, in most cases, there's a battery that's dedicated to the timecode generator that gets charged when you turn the unit on. And then when you turn the unit off, that battery keeps it running for a period of time, not forever, and not more than usually a couple of hours. But same thing actually in the Sound Devices 888, which I have here, and the 633. But then after that period of time and that battery for the timecode generator runs out, then it's time you're going to have to rejam. So that is something good to know. Back to practice. All right, enjoy. Cheers. I use an Asden 250 for very basic voiceover, and it's not subtle, but it works for me. Fair enough. Yep. It's getting the job done. It's getting the job done. Carlos says you can try the new Deity short shotgun mic. That would be the S-Mic 2S, I believe, or the Sennheiser ME64 or 62. Can't remember the number. It's a good one to consider. Kevin, the Blackmagic recognizes linear timecode from the audio port and automatically makes it metadata timecode, so no audio will show on the camera. Kevin, thank you for that. Does that apply also to the older Blackmagic Cinema camera, not the Pocket Cinema camera, but the original? Because I think that's what he's working with. I don't know the answer to that, but that's a good. Thanks for the input there. Another question: do you have a microphone that has an accurate flat response? Well, that's a good question. That's a good topic. I'm glad you brought that up. Let me just pull something. Actually, I'll just pull it up on the screen here. Let's just do something here. We're going to go to Rode. And let me switch the screen over here so you guys can see it. Okay, here's Rode. There's their new NTG5. Let's go find out more about that. And let's scroll down here to the bottom and let's look at the data sheet. Pull that up. Can you see this down here? Let's see if we can blow that up. Make it any bigger. I guess that's as big as it's going to go. So that's a really smooth line. You see how smooth that is? That's been averaged like crazy. Does this really represent what's going on? Well, maybe they had to average it quite a lot because maybe there's some variation in the mic. I don't know how much variation there is. There's going to be variation in every microphone production run. I don't know how much there is in the NTG5. But what my point here is that even when you see these specifications from the manufacturers, first of all, you need to realize they've generally been averaged pretty heavily. So there's some sort of averaging transform that's been done here before they draw this line on the chart, the frequency power chart here. But you have to know that your microphone is not going to line up exactly with this. And it's interesting if you do tests with your microphone and use a tone generator, I think you're going to find that most microphones don't have any sort of perfect flat frequency response. And is that good or bad? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's an interesting question, and I think I don't think I have a great answer to that. I think some people would say that this is very flat. That's what they aim for, at least. But it's a good question. Thanks for that. All right. Alan Moore. Actually, Aaron, welcome. And Alan, thanks for the question. I appreciate that. Aaron has done some tests along those lines. Aaron was looking at using a few different microphones as stereo pairs and put together a little sample of different tones and used that to kind of evaluate the microphones. So that's definitely something worth looking at or something considering to if you wanted to. And if you're asking the question on a more philosophical basis, I don't know if that's something to strive for or not. Hello, Lloyd. Yes, we actually I didn't actually prepare them like I normally do, Lloyd. The questions, so you didn't see them. I just read them this time, and we're just going through the follow ups to them. I feel like I'm a day late. Am I a day late? Yeah, sorry guys. Schedule got a little muddled up this week. So, what was the source for the Octava in Europe? Let me just pull that up for you. Tomen. Well, here's the United States one actually. Let's just show that. Thomann, Thomann music.com. And let's just see here. They have the Octava MK012, the Black Edition. They have different capsules, of course. Omni, they have a... There's the Hyper right there. And here's the Hyper in black. In any case, you can get a kit as well, but that's the domain there for that. So thanks for that question, Thomas. Best of wishes on that. My jacket is cinematic. Oh, I'll tell my wife. She bought it for me. She'll be delighted. Archie, I was just reading that that Fairlight was one of the top digital audio workstations a generation or two ago. May you give reflection on how Fairlight evolved, especially post Blackmagic adaptations. Yeah, so I don't know a ton about it, but Fairlight, as an independent company, before they were bought by Blackmagic, made relatively, kind of the larger scale consoles, and they focused on the cinema world. So re-recording mixers use them, and if you're not familiar with what re-recording is basically the kind of where the final mix takes place for sound for cinema. So they'll have dialogue editors working on the dialogue. They'll have sound effects editors. They'll have Foley, ADR, and then it's the re-recording mixer that puts it all together and does that final mix. And so I believe that's where the Fairlight consoles were often used. So it would be the big studios that would have Fairlight installations in theaters, re-recording theaters and things of that nature. So that's my understanding of where Fairlight kind of comes from. So they were very much at the high end. That is an incredibly niche market, as you might imagine. So they weren't selling a ton of those, and they weren't cheap. They were tens of thousands of dollars to get one of those. But now Blackmagic has bought them, and I don't know the whole history behind that. I suspect that it could be that maybe Fairlight was having some financial trouble, and Blackmagic came in to buy them because Blackmagic is much more of a mass market kind of company. Blackmagic is a very interesting company, actually, in a lot of ways. And I love what they're doing, but I also get very frustrated with using some of their products. And so that's one of my frustrations right now. So they took the software portion of Fairlight and integrated it into their DaVinci Resolve suite, if you will. Or is it a suite or an application, however you want to call it? It's been a little rough so far. I did a kind of a mini introductory course on it, and back then when I was using it, so that was version 15. 16 appears they fixed some of the issues and added a lot of new features, but it seems like there's still some kind of funky, buggy stuff in there as well, and it almost seemed like the syncing features in the edit page actually took a step backwards. It felt like, at least in some situations. So some people are reporting it's working great, others are having problems with it, so I love what Blackmagic's doing, but it's a little bit of a rough ride if you're relying on it for professional, actually earning money. So those are my thoughts on it. I really like it. I love DaVinci Resolve. I've got both the studio version and of course there's the free version. Very little difference between the two. So I think they brought a lot to the filmmaking world, especially those of us that are working on tighter budgets. So good stuff. Mr. Owens. Okay, so back to the question that Mark had in regards to timecode to the Blackmagic Cinema camera. You don't need to record timecode on an audio track. I made that mistake with my 4K the first time out. Part 2, connect your tentacle to the camera. If the green light is flashing on the tentacle, that's correct. Now go to the camera and tap the timecode numbers on the screen. I think they're, Mark, I don't know if that's the original cinema camera or the pocket cinema camera they're talking about. That is how it works on the pocket cinema camera. And see if it switches from what looks like record time 0000 to tentacle timecode. So yes, that is exactly how it works on the pocket cinema camera. I don't know whether that's how it's going to work on the original cinema camera, which it sounds like you're using because you're talking about 1/4-inch inputs. So you're going to have to make that distinction if you're looking in the forums. What they described in the forums there sounds very much like the pocket camera. So, all right, Maven Sony, is there something like placement of mic causing it to pick up less reverb? I found that placing mic as boomed pointed at chest reduces room reverb. Is it true? Yeah, that can make a huge difference. Microphone placement makes a huge, huge difference. I highly encourage those of you who have not experimented to put a shotgun mic or other boom microphone on a boom pole or a mic stand and aim it at different directions and see what difference it makes. It can make an astonishing difference in terms of the reverb it picks up and so on and so forth. In fact, on some of the gigs that I do when I'm working in a location I don't have a lot of control over, if we're doing, say, for example, an interview kind of framing, I will typically try to hang some sound blankets if I can behind the camera, but also on the floor behind the person that we're miking. And then as I boom, your microphone is aiming down, and behind them to the floor, there is a sound blanket which is absorbing some of the reflections, which will be hitting right behind them. So yeah, that can make a huge, huge difference, and you can really improve the sound. And that's typically why we boom up above and down at roughly 45 degrees or some angle to get the best quality sound. So definitely something worth experimenting with if you haven't already, but absolutely can make a difference. Does Fairlight support 32-bit float audio recording? Unfortunately, the answer is no. That's one of the big downsides right now if you're into that workflow. So no, that is a problem there. Thanks for bringing that up, Alejandro. All right. I like right angle cables connecting to my Mix Pre. If I connect good cables to something like a Lix Pro XLR angle adapter or MCS Pro audio short cables. What is the second part here? Here we go. Am I wasting the price of the better cables if I connect them? Does changing XLR cables increase potential noise or interference? Ooh, there are a lot of opinions on that. My experience is this. I don't notice a huge difference in quality if your cables have a good connection and you don't have, and you're not running them, parallel to power lines or other strong sources of electromagnetic fields and things of that nature. Typically, you're not going to find a big deal. I think a lot of this comes from the stage world, and actually, those of you that have worked in that world or even in a studio world a little bit more than I have, or a lot more than I have, I think those are cases where you do prefer to have the kind of more shielding in your cables and things of that nature. But the whole idea behind balanced cables is that if there is a good, clean connection, you should. The biggest difference is going to make is in the balanced nature. You can run the cables longer. And, they talk about oxygen free and so on and so forth. Maybe it makes a difference. I don't know. I haven't been able to hear a massive difference in my experience. So I don't go crazy with cables, but I try not to cheap out on them either. Again, I think this is where if you can kind of get in the mid range, you're going to do pretty well. I actually have my cables made. I have a local audio shop here called Performance Audio, and they use Mogami cable and Neutrik connectors, and they've been really, really good for me. So that's generally what I use. The right angle connectors I get, those are definitely really convenient when they're in a sound bag in particular, but in other situations they can be really helpful too. But if you're working with a quality balanced cable that doesn't have any sort of shorts in it, then my experience is that it's not necessarily a problem to use an adapter like that. But just make sure you're using high quality cables to avoid those issues. All right. Curtis, assuming you're getting more mics now that you are not using, want to sell one of your most favorite to your most favorite fan, an NTG5 Rest Mic 2? I need a mic for an upcoming show. Um, I don't have any for sale right now, but if you talk to my wife, she might be willing to sell them when I'm not looking. That's a joke, just to be clear. No, I like to keep them because when I do those reviews, I like to have them on hand. If I happen to cross an extra one that I'm not using, I'll let you know. And we'll probably talk about those here. By the way, we did, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had a giveaway for, I had an old audio interface that I wasn't using anymore, and that went to a new home. So we may do a little bit more of that in the future here. Do you prefer Lectros or WYSICOM? So we're talking about wireless microphone systems. I have used Lectro. I have not used WYSICOM, although the feature set on the WYSICOMs look nice, and they're now available in the United States. They used to be just Europe, but they've been in the United States now for, I think, a couple of years. I have not used them, so I don't know. Lectrosonics is an interesting company, very much an engineering company and catering to engineers, but they make some fantastic products that are incredibly reliable. I don't use either of them. I use Audio Limited for my wireless kits, and I've been very happy with those. But the Lectrosonics are also very good. Obviously, tons of professionals are relying on those. WYSICOMs are great. Lots of people are relying on those, but that's going to be more of a personal preference. I just don't have enough experience with the two of those to really kind of have formed an opinion on those. So, fair question. I would love a Sheps. Great mics. Lots of people would. Lloyd says return on investment on Sheps is good, but not many people tend to sell them once they buy them. They're really well built. That I would agree with that. They are incredibly well built. It's another German company that is very obsessive about quality, and it shows. The kit, it's kind of it's a pretty kit too. Comes in this very nice wooden box. I think the return on investment is good. I think that's fair to say, definitely. Thanks for chiming in there, Lloyd. Appreciate that. Archie, thanks for the show and telling about your Sheps. I'll take hand me downs. Okay. If I decide to get rid of this, I'll contact you, Archie. Thanks for that. And then Vincent, I guess you're second in line. So Tipo TV, what would you recommend regarding wireless systems? I'm saving for some good prosumer pro type of system. I work both in documentaries and fiction productions here in Argentina. Prosumer wireless. The only really, well, here's what I would suggest. First of all, my sense is that if you're working on narrative and documentaries, I would probably go with UHF systems as opposed to 2.4 gigahertz systems. Personal preference. The 2.4 gigahertz systems I've just found, if you get any distance between the receiver and the transmitter, they just seem to have problems. They're inconsistent, and there's not anything you can do to solve that problem. You can't change frequencies. They're dialed into 2.4 gigahertz. So you can dial up the power, but even that doesn't always solve the problem. And sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive. It's almost like dropping the power results in a better connection. It's craziness. So if you have to get the sound, and you don't want to be the one doing retakes, I would recommend a UHF system. In the prosumer realm, the ones I'm most familiar with are the Sennheiser G3, G4s. But there's some others out there. There's Shure has some. AKG has some that seem a little bit more focused on kind of live sound reinforcement, but they probably are good too. But in the film world, I think mostly what I see are probably the Sennheisers. The G3, G4 kind of their prosumer line. They have some higher end as well. And then once you get past that, there's actually the Sonys are actually pretty good as well. So those are worth looking at. I'm not as familiar with them on a kind of a first-hand basis with those, just haven't had a chance to work with them. So those are some thoughts there. That would be my preference. I don't know if any of you others have suggestions on that front, but that's some thoughts there. Mark, I learned an important lesson in sound recording this weekend. Ninja 5s are loud. Made the mistake of my D3 Pro directly in front of it, but outdoors, so didn't immediately realize it. That is a great point. This applies to not only those HDMI and SDI recorders for cameras, but also once you get into cinema cameras, those things can make a racket, and they're just maddening from a sound point of view. And I can't remember who said this. Somebody was talking about, I think it was Alan Cavedo was on one of the sessions here and talked about how on a production he worked on, they were using a red cinema camera. And what they did is they brought several bags of frozen peas, green peas, and in between takes they would slap the green pea bag on top of the camera to cool it off. Interestingly, the red cameras have this feature where between takes, when you're not recording, the fan kicks up into high gear and it's moving as much air as it can through. And then as soon as you start recording, the fan goes into kind of a low RPM mode, but it's still making plenty of noise. It's a small fan and it's pretty high RPM, even at its slow mode. So it makes a racket. But they were putting frozen peas on the camera in between takes to get the temperature down so that it wouldn't rev up the fan as much when they were shooting, when they were rolling. So um, anyway, yes, and I have found the Atomos recorders tend to be pretty noisy as well. Ninja 5 I haven't used itself, and I was hopeful that that one was a little bit quieter, but they are. Yeah, they're loud. Don't put a microphone right next to them or you're going to have a nightmare. All right, and Alan evidently refers to those as Arl cigars. Okay. Archie says thanks to Lloyd. Aaron Knight, this is an interesting point as well, and this is partly microphone placement, but also those natural sounding mics can really bring out mouth noises and imperfections, especially ones with a brighter tone. I couldn't agree more, and that's the thing that sometimes drives me crazy with this microphone is I'm getting all these sort of lip smacks and weird ticks and moisture noises and strange stuff like that, because and some of the Sennheisers I get that as well. The 416 I don't like on some voices for that very reason. So again, this is where it comes down to kind of a personal preference as well. But yeah, that is something I've definitely noticed. All right, Vincent. Chefs with music and analog 2-track on half-inch 2-track reel-to-reel on small ensemble. Ooh, we got an analog man here. Very good. Norm Claire, how do you like the 888? I like it quite a lot so far. I haven't done any big productions with it yet, but I love it. It is everything that I needed. I've learned the lesson that larger mixers like this suck through batteries faster than the 633 does, so I had to invest in a bunch more batteries. And in fact, I'm putting together a cart setup right now as well. And so I also ordered an AC adapter so I can power from AC in situations where that's feasible. So a lot of things going on there. But the 888 is a lovely machine so far. Really, really like it. Thanks so much for the information on humid environments. As I do stuff in Hawaii from time to time, I also consider a dehumidifier for sustaining equipment. That's a great idea for storage in particular, but you have to be careful when you're moving it from that dehumidified environment to a humid environment. You got to take it slow. Put everything in Ziploc bags and let it kind of get up to temperature, and then take it out of the Ziploc bag. Let the water condense, or the moisture condense on the bag itself. I remember actually when I was in Hawaii, we were taking a bus from one place and we were heading back to Honolulu, and the air conditioner on the bus went out and all of the windows fogged up. They couldn't see. They had to pull the bus over because it was so humid. And I'm sure when you do that work in Hawaii, you experience similar things to that. I have no hope on a C100 and kind of gave up going a different direction. Fair point. Lloyd says, so apparently there is a mode for this chat room called Top Chat, which doesn't show you anything. Frustrating. I'm now in live chat and see it all. Okay. Thank you for that, Lloyd. I didn't know the distinction there. So we want live chat if you want to see everything. Does the sound devices hold timecode in NVM with a battery inside? Always been curious about that. There is a battery. I don't know exactly all the details, how it works, but yes, we got that question. In regards to Canon cameras, if you could get your hands on a newer model Canon C500 Mark II with or without the V2 expansion unit, it adds 2 XLR audio connectors and Genlock, that would be awesome. It would indeed. Yes, it would be. Jonathan says, I'm in the market for a digital wireless lav system in the prosumer range. Which system do you think has the lowest self noise? Ooh, I don't know about the lowest self noise. Again, I haven't used, I would probably aim for the UHF systems. I can say this, I did not have a great experience with the Ceramonics. Those had a lot of noise. They generated plenty of their own self noise. And it wasn't just the lavalier mics either. It was that came with it. It was in the system itself, so I would avoid those. But others, the Sennheisers I had pretty good experience with. I've used those professionally on a number of jobs. So All right. DADS Mic 2 versus the Sennheiser MKH416. As an aspiring production sound mixer, is it worth getting a 416? I I think so. It's a hard one to answer, but what I would suggest is go take a look at that NTG5, Rode NTG5 video I just did. We do have the NTG5, the S-Mic 2S, the Sennheiser MKH416, and the Rode NTG3 in that video, and have some samples. And there's a link to the wave files from each of those mics. Go get that, listen to those, and see what you think. That's at least one data point, my voice only, but there's some thoughts on that. The thing with the MKH416 is, again, that was designed in the 1970s. That was analog recording days. I think back then they voiced the microphones a little bit different to kind of optimize them for tape recording. Tape recording, from what I understand, generally didn't pick up as much high frequency content as digital recording typically does, at least high quality digital recording now. And so that microphone was really voiced for that era when you're recording to tape. So to me, personally, it sounds a little on the bright side. That can sound a little harsh sometimes, but other people just absolutely love that sound. And you can also EQ that in post. It's not like the thing that you want to avoid is a microphone that suppresses a particular frequency range to some great extent, because then you can't really pull that. If it's not there, you can't pull a lot of it back because there's nothing to pull back, to restore in post. If there's a little bit of extra brightness, I prefer not to have to muddle with that in post if we don't have to, but you can EQ it in post. So, but go listen to that video because I think that'll be telling for you. I can definitely tell a difference between the S-Mic 2S and the MKH416. To my ears, and some people disagreed with me, to my ears, the NTG5 sounded really nice. The NTG3 has a very rich low end, as does the MKH416, and some people just love that. It melts them. It melts their ears, and they love that sound, and that's completely legitimate. If you like that sound, then go with it. It's a good return on investment. That mic will serve you, the 416 will serve you well. It works in humidity, whereas you're going to have trouble with some other mics. So yeah, it's definitely not a bad investment by any means. I know you had a chance to play with the sound devices Scorpio. Have you had a chance to play with the Nova from Zaxcom? I would love to hear your take on it. No, as far as I'm aware, the Nova is still not shipping. And that was one that was in the consideration. I was actually considering purchasing that one because I was doing a couple of jobs where the 633 just did not have enough inputs. I ended up going with the 888 from Sound Devices instead. But the Nova looks like an amazing machine. But as far as I know, it's not shipping yet. So, and I think, let me go back to that for a second. I think that's one of the challenges. I love the technology that Zaxcom is developing, but I think because they're such a small shop, they sometimes struggle to deliver. So that's my impression. And maybe some of you have a different experience with them. Thanks so much for your amazing quality content. I have a quick question. If you have any educated guesses, any ideas how the Video Mic NTG might hold up to the NTG4? That's a fine question, Adam. I think it's kind of aimed at a different series of use cases. Now, the Video Mic NTG is a 3.5 millimeter output mic. So really it's kind of made to to mount on top of your camera, and you can adapt it to use it on a boom pole. I don't know yet whether or not that output is balanced or not. I just don't know. I haven't checked it to see if they have that in their documentation. But that'll make a difference. If you need something that you can run a relatively long cable, the NTG4 is going to win because it has a balanced XLR output. The Video Mic NTG, I don't know whether it does or not. So that may or may not take you out of the running depending on what you're trying to do with it. If it is balanced, then it could be an interesting mic if you're willing to use a 3.5 millimeter adapter to get to an XLR output and then do a longer cable run if you need to do that. But those are my initial thoughts. The other thing is the Rode marketing for the Video Mic NTG is a little bit strange, and I don't think they intended it to be this way, but here's my impression. One of the things they say is we use the same interference tube design with the circular holes as opposed to slits. And they almost make it sound like the Video Mic NTG is every bit as amazing as the NTG5. But what they don't explicitly point out is that the Video Mic NTG is not an RF bias microphone. Not that RF bias is automatically superior, but it's a different principle. It's a different operating principle, and it works differently. And I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to get a Video Mic NTG here before too long, so I'm definitely planning to do a review of it. So we'll definitely have some more thoughts. I don't know if you are in a hurry and need something right away, but I'm not. I will say this: I'm not a huge fan of the Rode NTG4. Sorry, Rode. Sorry. I just never liked the voicing on it. It sounded very mid-range hyped and just not very pleasing. And if you use it like if you use it really, really close, like a voiceover mic, it sounded okay. But if you were booming it like you typically would with a shotgun microphone, it sounded very thin to me and kind of mid-rangey. Alarm Clock Films, it is worth it in Norm's opinion. Very good. Aaron, I don't think Rode do much averaging. If you look at the NT1A, for example, I do like the NTG5. It's really nice. You mean on the frequency response charts? I assume is what you're talking about, Aaron. Those pretty curves look pretty average to me, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It seems like they use some sort of smoothing algorithm, but who knows how much? All we know is what's published, and so I think there is some there. Oh yeah, in regards to the very flat response mics, good point. Earthworks does also kind of come at microphone design from a trying to get as flat a response as possible. A lot of their mics are actually measurement mics used for measuring acoustical environments. So that is definitely one of their design goals, is to make something very flat. So there's an answer to that question. I spend ages tinkering with stereo images. I'm a mid-side tweak it in post type of fangirl. That's a great idea. And actually, I am excited to try some of that myself. So thanks, Aaron, for sharing that file with me last week. Sorry if I missed that. Not sure if you're replying to my question before because you said Alan. If that was, and thank you. No, I was actually, I'm not sure. But we're moving on. Alejandro, also, what do you know about the Zaxcom has on their transmitters with the recording option? Will Electrosonics or Audio Limited be able to provide something like that? So here's the thing with Zaxcom. In the United States, they had filed for and were granted some patents that are now being challenged in regards to a variety of technologies. So one of them was that they had a recorder built into the wireless transmitter on their wireless microphone systems. They patented that. And so in the United States, Audio Limited, Electrosonics, and Wizicom cannot do that unless they're doing it with a boom microphone. They cannot do it with lavalier microphones, but they can with boom microphones. So Zaxcom has the patent on that. Another thing that Zaxcom had a patent on is what they call their never clip technology. So they took this idea of using dual analog to digital converters on each input and being able to capture a wider dynamic range. But the way that Zaxcom does it is they then take that, and there's probably some algorithm for how they do a crossover and bring those back together, and then they save it to a 24-bit proprietary file format called MARF, which is something like Mobile Audio Recording Format, I think is what MARF stands for. So that's how they approach the whole thing. So they patented that as well. So there was this concern that other companies couldn't do dual to analog to digital conversion because there was a patent on it. Well, evidently, I don't know if Sound Devices or these other companies that are doing this, Zoom, are in court now with Zaxcom. I do know that at NAB this year, earlier in 2019, that Glenn Sanders, the founder and the kind of the main engineer at Zaxcom, came over to the Zoom booth when he found out that the F6 had dual analog to digital converters, and he was asking a lot of questions. I don't know if anything ended up in court over that. I don't know who's challenging it. I have heard that somebody's challenging the Zaxcom patents. I don't know more than that, but those are some thoughts there, and that's why I think a lot of the manufacturers have been kind of standoffish about these things. Another thing they have a patent on, I believe, is the ability to control the transmitters from the mixer, because they have their whole system for doing that as well on the Zaxcom side. So really cool technologies. It's it's a little frustrating that it's patented from the stand, so that these are anyway. That's the situation. So you can't, for example, with my audio limited A10, I have a Bluetooth app I can use to control the transmitters, but I can't control it from my mixer like you can on a Zaxcom. Um, uh, they have the Diva and they have the Nomad. They now have the Nova, and they had the Max. The Max actually couldn't before anyway, I don't believe, but maybe I'm wrong on that. I'm not sure of whether the Max could do it. But the Nova, the Nomad, and the Diva, you could control the transmitters from those mixer recorders. So anyway, that's a whole philosophical debate that I don't. It frustrates me a little bit because I'd love to see Sound Devices be and Audio Limited be able to do something like that, but the patents are the patents, and so is what it is. So I don't know what the right answer is, but a little frustrating at times. Oh, so Aaron is kind of weighing in on the octaves as well. Really nice for detailed, intimate Foley. Very good. I've used them only on voice for dialogue, and they've worked very nicely. But great to know they work on those as well. Removing ticking noises in audio with Isotope RX Elements and Pro Tools. I don't know about Elements. I think you have to move up into the full version or the advanced version. My approach is they do have a declick thing that can work for some ticking noises. And then, of course, they have the spectral cleanup that you can do by actually using a brush and actually finding the ticking. If it's limited to a range of frequencies, it makes it easier, but you can actually basically paint it out. We did do a sound for video session quite some time ago where we looked at that a little bit, but I think I need to come back to that topic again. I apologize. I don't know that there's a way to do that in Elements, unfortunately. Are you a one-man live streamer or do you have production moderator support? Well, I'm flattered that you would even ask that question. No, this is purely a one-man show. I thought it showed, but I'm happy to learn that it doesn't show. Are those yellow filtered glasses? They are indeed, Peter. Thanks for asking. These are glasses that I purchased on Amazon for a solid $13 or something like that. The reason I do that is that at my age, as I get a little older, I find that looking at a computer screen, and I do a lot of that throughout the day as well, that my eyes would just get so irritated by the end of the day. Surprisingly, these make a massive difference. So they look a little funny, but, and yeah, they do filter the blue light is the idea. So that is exactly why I wear them. Alarm Clock Films, there's an answer to your question. I'm trying to remember which question it was. So I have a better luck using thump presets and the multiband algorithm if it's bad. Can't remember what that was in response to, but there's a thought there. Javier, have you gotten around to listening to the Countryman B3s on the Tascam DR10L for the purpose of backup film audio? I did use a Countryman B3s once, many years ago, but it was before the Tascam DR10L was available in the United States. I was using with the Zoom, just a little H1 recorder back in the day. So it was quite a few years ago. And it was okay. It sounded decent. It was a little on the noisy. It produced some self noise. And I don't know if I think it was mostly the microphone. But that one was, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that one was terminated with an XLR connector. But I think the impression I came away with was it was okay. But it seemed, in that particular case, to be a little bit noisy. There's a fair bit of self noise, but that's probably worth testing again. So I haven't looked at it more recently than that. It's been quite some time since I looked at those. Oh yes, thanks for bringing this up, Bang's Naughty Bits. Isotope has a great Black Friday week deal with the Elements bundle and several other effects for $49. So if you were looking for some of those plugins for your digital audio workstation, Isotope has some really good deals going on right now, so go check those out at isotope.com. Also, how are the preamps on the Zoom F4 versus the H6? They're in completely different leagues, Javier. The Zoom F4 is far superior, much cleaner, you can provide a ton more gain. You can go up to 75 dB of gain on the Zoom F4, as I recall. I think the Zoom H6 tops out somewhere in the 50s. So there's quite a bit more clean gain on the F6. So yeah, it's definitely a kind of a night and day difference. Greg, thanks for joining us. And Bang's Naughty Bit says F4 is much better, 8 dB less self noise, and beyond that, again, the additional gain. Could you talk briefly about how you've treated your room? So this room here is my mixing room, and what I have here are some bass traps from a company called GIK Acoustics. When you purchase through them, it's not cheap, but when you purchase through them, one of the services they offer is they have an acoustician that helps you design your room. So basically, the assumption is that you can't really knock any walls out, but you can treat it with bass traps and diffusers and other things of that nature for acoustic treatment. And so, a lot of people also, let me make a distinction here. A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to soundproof my room." Soundproofing is a completely different thing than acoustical treatment like this. Soundproofing is to keep sound from getting out or from sound from outside getting in. That's one thing. This is just to tame the listening environment within here to prevent the sound from continuing to reflect all around the room, creating standing waves, creating phase and comb filtering, and all the kind of things that mess with your ability to hear what's actually coming out of the speakers. And so I have two floor-to-ceiling stacks of bass traps behind me. I'm not going to turn the camera around because there's a light right behind the camera here. But two stacks, and they're about, I think they're about 2 feet thick at the center part. And those are sitting behind the two monitors here, which you also can't see right now. But the idea there is, again, to do some good absorption of the bass in the corners. And then behind us here, we have a variety of different traps. So I've got two over here at the first reflection points from this speaker. And then I've got some over here at the reflection points for this right-hand speaker. Plus I have some additional on the back wall. Those on the back wall, they actually, underneath the fabric, there's actually a kind of a, I don't know what the material is exactly, but most of these are filled with kind of a rock wool-like material that will absorb broadband sound. So it's not, the problem, the difference is that with the foam you typically see, that's only going to capture and absorb high frequency sound. It's not going to capture the bass. And honestly, in most small listening rooms, bass is your bigger problem. And so that's why these are using kind of more broadband trapping. So they'll actually get the high frequency and the low frequency to some extent. Not the low stuff, but those traps on the back walls actually have a material on them that will actually reflect some of the high frequency sound, because they didn't want to absorb too much high frequency when they couldn't absorb as much bass, because otherwise you can get things really out of whack. So that's kind of the story of how we got here. It's about, there are a couple on the ceiling as well, so that help kind of absorb that, so you don't get the sound bouncing up and down floor to ceiling as well. So there's about it was about a $2,000 investment, as I recall. So that's kind of where we're at on that. Lloyd, on average, how many timecode generators are used on set? Or in other words, how many would you buy to start? I think that really depends on how many cameras are on set. So most of the mixers I'm using have inbuilt timecode generators, and then I have to have one for each camera. So for the productions I work on, usually it's one or two cameras. So usually one or two timecode generators would be enough to start, again, depending on which mixer you're using and whether it has an inbuilt timecode generator. If it does not have an inbuilt timecode generator, you're going to need one for the mixer as well. So good question, Lloyd. Lloyd, are you going to move into the film world? Because you'll probably kick all of our butts because you have all that experience and a good ear. All right, over to Robert. I have the MKH 416 and 50. They're both great, but not as natural as others, like headphones that sound better than real life. That's an interesting point, Robert. I think one thing what's interesting is some people have described the MKH 50, which is a kind of Sennheiser's equivalent of the CMC 641 from Schoeps. I've heard people call it sounds aggressive, and it's a great sounding mic. A lot of people use it. But they sound, some people described it as sounding like an action movie. And I thought that was actually I've used the MKH50 as well. I have a review of it if you want to see it on my channel from a couple of years ago. It does have a very forward sound to it. It's an interesting sound. It's not bad at all. I like it actually. But as you say, it can sound better than real life, which is an interesting point. Okay. In response to Javier about the Zoom F4 versus the H6, Bang's Naughty Bits notes that also the hybrid digital limiters in the H4 are at least useful, and I agree, they are at least useful, and they make Curtis shout in funny ways testing them. That's true. If you want to laugh at my expense and go watch one of those videos, I have a Zoom F4 review that you're welcome to watch to get a good laugh, I guess. With huge dynamic ranges, I wonder if we'll get microphone profiles like lens profiles, and editors will use them to flatten sound out at import. That's an interesting thought. Very interesting one, Mark. There's probably an opportunity there. I agree with you about the MKH416. I too think it's voiced for analog, and yes, you need it to print to tape differently than to a digital audio workstation. Absolutely agree. Whoa, hey, for all those you in the market for a 416, here's your big chance. Evidently, BSW, which I believe is in the United States, has it for $799, usually $1,000. So there you go, if you're into that. The Video Mic NTG is an Electret, yes. And I don't know enough about microphone design to know the distinction between DC bias and Electret. I think in the end, they're kind of doing the same thing. Electret is kind of a permanently polarized scenario. And sometimes other people refer to the other DC bias method as true condenser, which is kind of a weird term. I don't think it's a very useful term because I think it's a little bit misleading at some level. But yes, thanks for that, Aaron. How many microphones do you use for something to be mastered to 7.1 surround sound? As few as one. And in fact, that's what I think a lot of people don't realize is that when you're talking about surround sound, a lot of that work you're just recording, for at least dialogue, is often just recorded mono. A lot of the sound effects are recorded mono, and then in post you pan them within the 7.1 surround field to where you want them. Some of the ambiances are probably stereo recorded, and they probably have ways of, if you do mid-side stereo, I don't know how that works. I don't know how mid-side decoding works in a surround kind of format. That's not something I've done. Maybe Aaron knows something about that. So if you do, I'd love to hear. Okay, when you bought the A10s, did they come in a bundle package? I bought them from Gotham Sound here in the US. No, I had to buy them independently. So I bought 2 transmitters and a single dual channel receiver. I just threw them all into the cart at the same time. There was no discount. Sometimes you will get specials. If you want to see what those specials are, I would get signed up at all of the audio houses here in the US if you're buying in the US. Gotham Sound, True Audio, Productions, or Location Sound Corp, Audio Department. I'm probably missing several others. But get signed up for their mailing lists and you will get the, various times of year. There are a bunch of specials right now. So go to Gotham, go to True, go to the others, and you'll see there are a variety of different specials. I know KTEC has specials right now. I have seen Audio Limited A10 specials in the past. It's probably last year that I saw them, or early this year that I saw them. So yeah, there are definitely sometimes specials on those. So take a look. You might have to sell body parts. I would recommend you not sell body parts to acquire audio gear. You will regret it. All right. Wow on the Zaxcom patent commentary. It doesn't apply outside the United States as I understand it, but that's my understand. God bless the U.S. Patent Office, the most unfit for purpose patent office in the world. I do have some issues with some of the patents out there. Use f.lux. I don't know what that is. Oh, for your computer screen. It will help for your eyes. Thank you. I will check that out. Alejandro, how good RX Advanced or any other sound editing system about removing heartbeats? I just got a call from a client who ended ended up using boom audio instead. Yeah, sometimes lavaliers can pick up heartbeats if you put them right over the heart in particular. So you will have to watch for that. Especially if you've got actors that are going to be really getting into a role. It's not just going to be a kind of a low-key talking kind of thing. So yeah, something to watch out for. But how it can do it. It's not great. I guess to answer your question, Alejandro, it's not great. But you can do it. You can remove it. A heartbeat is fairly low frequency as it comes through on a mic, so you may have to cut into that low end a little bit. But anyway, something to consider. Whoa, we've been going at this for an hour and a half, people. But Javier has his last question. He promises. As starter mics with the NTG3 shotgun and either the Octava MK012 or Audix SCX1, which of the two hypers be a fair starting point? Absolutely, that'd be a fair starting point. The Audix is not as hot of a mic. That is, its output signal is not as hot. So you're going to need a little bit more preamplifier behind it, but it sounds very good. The Octava has the advantage of having, I believe, a slightly hotter mic output or output signal, but it is very sensitive to movement. So if you're going to be booming by hand, the Audix may have the advantage there. Those are just some initial thoughts, but definitely go around and listen to lots of samples of those. We've actually got samples of all three of those mics at various points on the channel. Yesterday's NTG5 video had some NTG3 samples. I did a video several years ago, the one that we showed earlier on, called 5 Boom Microphones for In-Dialogue, which we included the Audix on. And then we have another video on the MK012. So if you do some searching there on the channel, you'll run into all of those, Hobby. All right. Your opinions on KEF monitors. I'm considering the KEF LSX for compact multifunctionality. KEF has been in the near field monitor business for a long time. Lots of people like them. Lots of audiophiles like them for music listening. That's about all I know about them. I think they're respected. I think they have some respect out there. So those are some thoughts there on that. Aaron. It's also important to note, never cheap out on acoustic treatment. Cheap foam is super flammable, and rock wool and insulation is disastrous to lungs. Yes, good point. Two very important things. So these, actually, one of the things they do is they seal them in some fabrics so that they shouldn't be problematic. And I don't know that they're actually using rock wool in these particular cases, although rock wool is something that is often used as a bass trap material. Cheap foam is super flammable, and I think the problem with cheap foam in an environment like this is that it will absorb the high frequencies, but it will do nothing for low frequencies. Even those big, thick foam things you put in the corners, generally those won't go lower than about 250 hertz, so they're not really helping you out. And if you get a kind of an imbalanced room where you're sucking up all the high frequencies, but none of the low frequencies, you could create other problems. So you're better off, I think, avoiding that foam acoustic treatment. I'll just leave it at that. In fact, I actually consulted with a group that was putting together a podcast some time ago, and they had this office space. It was a room that had glass walls on two sides, and it was this, I think it was like an 8 or maybe 9 foot ceiling. It was really boxy sounding. It was horrible acoustically, but it was a great place for a podcast because they had this nice big table in the center, and they had a bunch of SM7B set up and a mixer and so on and so forth. Really great setup, but it sounded awful. And they were trying to find out, how can we make this thing sound better? So they had ordered a bunch of this foam, and they had glued it up on all the walls, and they said, well, it sounds a little bit better. And indeed it did sound a little bit better, but what we ended up doing that ended up sounding the best was hanging a bunch of sound blankets away from the wall a little bit. So there was a little bit of space. Now, that's not going to take care of all the low frequencies as well, but it did a pretty nice job. So I would just say be careful with the foam. Don't plaster an entire room with foam. And Aaron, thanks for your points. I think those are all very good points as far as health and safety are concerned. How about comparing the F4 and MixPre 2? I ended up getting the MixPre 10.2 because of the F4's delays. Very happy with the quality and change. In my MixPre 2 review on YouTube, I talk specifically about that. I don't want to get too much into it here. But what I will say is that I think you may have actually been referring to the F6's delays. The F4 is actually one of their older units. The F6 was the one that has the wide dynamic range 32-bit float recording. I compared the two of those in my MixPre 10.2 review and in my Zoom F6 review, so you can get my thoughts on it there. I think they're both great recorders. I think the F6 has some deficiencies that the MixPre line takes care of for production sound. Specifically for production sound, that's not to say I don't like the F6. I purchased it. I like it. It will serve a lot of people very well with great audio quality. But I think the MixPre has a few advantages, but MixPre also has some disadvantages from the standpoint that it's a lot more expensive. So while they have similar functionality, the sound devices are more expensive. So that's probably the biggest thing there. But yeah, I think you're happy with the quality and the change on the MixPre 10.2, and I would expect that. It's a pretty good kit. Lloyd has purchased a starter kit, and I'm looking for corporate work to start. Being a production sound mixer is something I've always wanted to do. Lloyd, I wish you the best on that. I would have figured you would be more of the post sound designer guy, but maybe you can do it all. I think you've got the skill set for all of it. So, best of wishes there. The MixPre and the MixPre 2 sound almost the same, a bit more dynamic range, so the MixPre F8 test should still hold up. I think that's probably true. And yeah, the F6. And yes, you clarified the F6. Okay. Oh, good point, Lloyd. I'm glad you mentioned that. Sometimes Gotham does create packages that aren't available otherwise. To do that, typically you have to call them, not just order off the website. So, yeah, they can put together packages potentially. In fact, when I bought my 888, I bought it from Gotham, and I needed some cables that actually aren't available off the shelf. And so they threw a lot of those in, and those cables can be expensive. You'll see as you start to put together those kind of packages, like the cable that goes from the battery cup receiver to the mixer or to the battery distribution system. Man, those could be $100 on their own, each one. And I wanted a couple of them so I could have redundant batteries. And man, just super expensive. But yeah, a lot of times they'll be willing certainly to throw in those kind of things. So they'll give you a quote, but you have to call them usually. 32-bit recording is a little bit different on the F6. Back to your question, Peter. You don't set gain on the F6, but you do set gain on the MixPre, even in 32-bit mode. In both cases, the limiters are turned off in 32-bit mode, and I have heard reports of people clipping on the F6, and I don't know, that's going to be a pretty rare circumstance, but somebody messaged me and said that, hey, they were using this special, incredibly dynamic microphone, incredibly wide dynamic range microphone, and they were able to get the F6 to clip. And they actually couldn't get it to not clip with a specific, very percussive, loud sound they were trying to record. So, some thoughts there. Midside is probably going to be replaced by ambisonic recordings for surround. The only benefit to midside is adjusting the stereo width in post. I've never done 7.1. It's okay, Aaron. I'm with you. I haven't either. All right, we're going to wrap it up here in just the next couple of minutes, people. Lloyd, you can get corporate work by way of a site called Staff Me Up. A lot of it also works by way of recommendation. And while we're on recommendations along those lines, Mandy Crew is another one. MANDY Crew in the United States. You can get on the mailing list there, and they have paid accounts as well. Don't know all the details, but that can be a way to find jobs as well. SMH777, do you have any insights on recording very quiet sounds on the MixPre 2 series? The aim is to use the chain like an audio microscope. The sounds are to be boosted and processed later. I think the MixPre 2 is a fine choice for that. I think you're still going to need quite a bit of gain, because if it's extraordinarily quiet sounds, you're going to want to do you're still going to want to optimize your signal to noise ratio, so you're still going to want to gain up. And the mix pre has extraordinarily quiet in terms of self noise preamplifiers, so I think you'd be in good hands with that combination. I would say you are plan on gaining up, and then you can also boost that in post. And there's not a lot of cost to boosting in post, so don't be afraid to use that gain during the recording. Peter, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Ramiro, I have a mix pre 10T. My audio levels are set, but when I drop my files on my editor, the sound waves are so small. Any idea why? Well, I'd have to see some more details, but if your peaks are hitting somewhere around minus 24, it's not unusual for those to look really small in a digital audio workstation. You could probably gain up a little bit more than that, and probably peaking, somewhere in the minus 18, maybe even as much as minus 12, especially since you have those limiters. But I wouldn't push it beyond that if you can avoid it. And then you'll notice it'll be a little bit bigger in post. But that's not. It's not an issue. Remember, you're working with very clean preamplifiers and good analog to digital conversion, so it's a-okay to push those in post. So don't be afraid to do that. Also, if they're extraordinarily small, then you probably do need to gain up a little bit more and get those meters jumping a little bit closer to 18 to minus 12, minus 18 to minus 12. Can you change the waveform sizes in the DAW you use? I don't know. I'm assuming you're talking about that the amplitude is actually really small and not just the view is small. So still hoping you'll register a Discord server so we can get announcements about live streams and chat. I'd need help doing that. I can't do that on my own. I just don't have the bandwidth to do it, to be honest. But I'm not opposed to it, that's for sure. Several cheap audio interfaces are shipping with 32-bit float with their 100 dB dynamic range. Been telling people it's just buzzwords for the uninformed. Anything I might be missing? I think you're probably right. If they're using a single analog to digital converter and they're speccing at 100 dB of dynamic range, then yeah, the 32-bit float's not going to help in that situation. So you can easily fit that kind of dynamic range into 24 bits, even 16 bits. So I just bought the F6 recently, also purchased the K-Tech bag for the F6. Would you have any recommendations for mounting wireless receivers? I commonly use the Sennheiser AVX and G4 wireless kits. I haven't seen that bag, Brandon, so I'm not sure how that works. I actually see that it was on special, actually. I was thinking about buying it, but I haven't yet. I don't know how that bag is configured and where you would mount them. The AVX are going to be tricky in particular because you could use the adapter cables and move them out away from the F6 itself. I'm sorry, but if anyone else has info on that, definitely let us know. All right. It's a free hosted service. Would be happy to help set one up. I may get in touch with you, Mark, then. If you wouldn't mind shooting me your email at curtis@learnlightandsound.com, that would be awesome. All right. All right, everybody. It's definitely time for me to get to bed. I got to do the dishes still. It's 9:43 here. Thanks for everybody for joining today's session. So thanks so much for the questions and for the input that you bring here with the community. I really appreciate it. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you all again real soon. Take care, everybody.